Start the webcast. We're live now, Chair.
Okay. Okay, good morning. Welcome to today's meeting. I'm Councillor Alan Lamb and I chair the Children and Families Scrutiny Board. Just before we begin, I'm going to read a brief prepared statement just to set out the terms of the meeting. So it's just to clarify that this is a remote consultative meeting of the Children and Families Scrutiny Board. And so while it's being webcast live to enable public access, it's not being held as a public meeting in accordance with the Local Government Act 1972. Today's discussion will still very much help inform the work of the Scrutiny Board, and should there be any proposed actions stemming from today's meeting that do require formal ratification, then these will be referred to the next formal public meeting of the Scrutiny Board for approval. So before we get into the main items, I'd like to invite members of the board, including those who might be attending as a substitute, to introduce themselves, and I'm going to go around in alphabetical order. So if I can start with Helen Bellamy, please.
Helen Bellamy, and I'm school staff representative.
Thank you. Kate Blacker, please. Not sure if Kate's with us yet, so we'll come back to her. Tony Britton, please.
Tony Britton, I represent the Roman Catholic Diocese of Leeds.
Thank you. Councillor Burke, who I believe is substituting for Councillor Bithell today.
Sharon Burke, Councillor for Middleton Park Ward.
Thank you, and you're very welcome to our meeting today, Councillor Burke.
Thank you.
Councillor Flint, please.
Good morning, Councillor Emma Flint in Wheatwood.
Thank you, and Councillor Flynn, please.
Thanks, Emma. I'm glad you look different to me, because every time he says Flint, I nearly speak. Good morning, Billy Flynn, Councillor for Adlam Wharfdale Ward. Much better looking than me, I hasten to add.
I won't comment. There are some subtle differences, though. Celia Foote, please.
Good morning, Celia Foote, school staff representative.
Thank you. Councillor Forsyth, please.
Good morning, Councillor Anne Forsyth, Farnley and Wortley Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Caroline Gruen, please.
Good morning, Councillor Caroline Gruen. I represent Bramley and Stanley Ward. I'd like to apologise to any members of the public. I cannot get my video to work this morning on my computer. That's why you can't see me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Gruen. I usually have to apologise that I can get my video to work so people can see me. So, but you have the reverse today. So, Councillor Hussain, please.
Good morning, Councillor Hussain, representing the Randy Ward.
Thank you very much. Councillor Illingworth, please.
Good morning, it's John Illingworth, representing Kirkstall Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Lay, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Sandy, Councillor Lay, Otley and Yeadon Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Marshall Catung, please.
Good morning, it's Abigail Marshall Catung, representing Little London, Woodhouse and the Citizens.
Thank you. Councillor Renshaw, please.
Good morning, Councillor Karen Renshaw, representing Asden Robin Hood Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Senior.
Good morning, Councillor Jane Senior from Morley South Ward.
Thank you. And Councillor Stevenson, please.
Good morning, everybody. Ryan Stevenson, representing the Harewood Ward.
Thank you. And I believe Kate Blacker is with us now. So, Kate, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Morning, yes, apologies for my lateness. It's Kate Blacker. I'm the co-opted member for Parent Governors Primary Schools.
Thank you. And then finally, we have a couple of our supporting officers today. So, Angela, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Good morning, everyone. Angela Brogden, Principal Scrutiny Advisor.
Thank you. And finally, Harriet, please.
Good morning, everyone. Harriet Spate, Governance Officer.
Okay, thank you. And you're all very welcome to the meeting this morning. So we'll get into the agenda. I'll ask the executive members and the other council officers to introduce themselves once we get into the relevant items. So item 1 is any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests. And it looks like we don't have any. I don't have apologies down on my agenda, but I know we have a couple of apologies, I believe, from Andrew Graham, who's a co-opted member, and also from Jackie Ward, who's a co-opted member. Harriet, I don't know if there's any others that I've missed.
They're the same as the apologies that I've got written down, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And then item 2 is to we've got the meeting note from our consultative meeting on the 9th of June. So I don't know if anyone's got any issues of accuracy or of any matters arising from that. I'm not seeing any hands up, so that's good. So we can get on to the substantive items of the agenda. So item 3 is first, which is the youth work review and future vision. So if I just ask the executive members and officers to introduce themselves in the first instance. So I've got Councillor Harland, please.
Good morning, everybody. Nice to see you all. Councillor Mary Harland, Executive Board Member for Communities, which now encompasses the Youth Service too.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Venner, please.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Fiona Venner. I'm the Executive Board Member for Adult and Children's Social Care, Early Years and Health Partnerships. Thank you.
That's a very long title. Councillor Pryor, please.
Morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Jonathan Pryor. I'm Deputy Leader of the Council and Executive Member for Economy, Culture and Education.
Thank you. And Sal Tariq, please.
Hey everybody, Salim Tarek. I'm Director of Children and Families here in Leeds.
Thank you. And Ruth Terry, please.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm Ruth Terry. I'm the Chief Officer for Children's Social Work in Leeds.
Okay, thank you. And then Sal, are there any other officers that are contributing to this item?
Not to this item. I think we've got a volunteer on for the other item.
No problem. Okay, so I think initially we'll hand over to Councillor Harland to introduce this, and then you can invite any of the officers that you want to contribute as well. So over to you, Councillor Harland.
Thank you, Chair. I think the report that went to Exec Board in April, ably taken through by my predecessor, Councillor Fiona Venner, is a very comprehensive review of where we are, why we're here, and where we want to be. As we go through the consultations and the implementations towards April next year, I just thought it would be useful for this board to take an overview and a brief, watching brief on where we are and how we progress. So I'll leave it to officers now to add anything that they would like to add.
Okay, thank you. So Sal, did you want to make any introductions?
Yeah, sure. So just to say that we've undertaken a really comprehensive review of youth work provision in the city. We consulted along the way with large numbers of children and young people, elected members, stakeholders to determine the model and structure for the provision of youth work in the city. What we were clear about was that we wanted to have a clear vision for youth work, because what that allows us to do is to clearly express what we are trying to achieve in terms of the work, and quite a lot of the principles and values that we base that on are set out in detail in the report. But we also wanted to give the youth work service some emphasis in terms of it being publicly recognised, and to give staff that sense of how much it is valued as a service across the city, because we know that the approach that youth workers take means that they are able to engage young people in a way that other services are not able to. And part of that is to do with the youth work philosophy around how they interact, where they meet with the children and young people, and building those relationships that are going to help those young people with their social, emotional and educational development. So we set about that work. We provided the report that says how we wish to take it forward, and in effect what we've got are 3 strands to the service, and one is a core offer that will be right across the city. So that will be undertaken by youth work services that are based in the local authority. So there are some places in the city where currently that isn't, where that provision isn't provided by the local authority, but that core offer of that universal and early targeted work that needs to be undertaken by youth workers will be done by the local authority. And none of the areas across the city would lose out in terms of the current youth work resource. So we have planned to deliver that in that way, which I think is really positive. The service has, over a number of years, had to see efficiencies and reductions, but in this last period of time, going through the service reviews and the cuts that we've had to make right across the council, the youth work service has been protected, and in fact there has also been some additional investment in terms of a recognition that we need to work with children and young people, particularly post-pandemic, in terms of their mental health. So that first bit is the core offer that we've set out again in the report, and then there is a further offer for the third sector to provide services in our areas where there is greater level of demand, and again we've set that out in the report. We also wanted to have an opportunity for much smaller organisations who have a different type of reach in terms of some of the young people that we want to work with. So we have a third part of the offer, which is for small organisations to make bids for grants. So that's how we've set out the youth work offer. Where we've got to is that we are working on the changes that are needed to the core offer within the youth work service. We've recently recruited to 2 key management posts within the youth work service, and that will help us to take forward and implement all of the work that we need to do there. For the part of the implementation where we invite the third sector to bid, it was agreed that that would be done through further consultation, and we've undertaken that consultation with young people living in the 12 wards of highest needs. We've had 4 virtual engagement and consultation events with partners and stakeholders across the city, and our commissioning team are now pulling all of that information together in order to put forward a specification to which organisations will be able to bid. That work will be moving forward as of the coming few weeks, but the third part of it was really around the grants that we offered, and again that grant window will be opening from next week, so organisations will be able to make a bid for the work that we need to do there. I think that's kind of giving you an overview of where we've got to with the youth work review, and there's much more detail obviously included in terms of the report that we've provided, but happy to take any questions. I've got Ruth here with me as well if you need a bit more detail.
Okay, thank you for that, Sal. So we're into questions and comments at this point. So I'm not in any way surprised that Councillor Renshaw is fastest finger on this one. But yeah, go ahead, Councillor Renshaw.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say a big thank you to the South East team that cover my ward, because throughout the whole of the pandemic, they've delivered a service for the young people, and it's been so consistent and appropriate and effective that I'd just like to pass on my thanks. What I am wondering about is regarding the applications for the funding and the grants, will the local authority team still be able to put in bids for that, or is it just for the third sector?
So having during the consultation, this was one of the key issues that was raised, particularly by elected members, and so that provision has been made for the ability for some of those teams to be able to bid for specific grants to work with particular groups or of young people that they identify the need for. So yes.
Thank you for that. Okay. It's just that in Ardsley and Robin Hood, and I know in other wards as well, it's only the local authority who actually deliver the youth service. So we rely on and depend on, we get a thorough service from our youth team in Ardsley and Robin Hood. And I just wondered if they will be allowed to put in bids for things, or are they eliminated from doing that?
Sorry, Councillor Rainshaw, they will be able to.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Venner, did you want to contribute?
I was just going to answer that question actually. So there's two different parts of the grant scheme. So the main contract is just for the third sector in terms of the additionality, but the smaller grants can be applied to by either the third sector or the core council youth service. And the reason for that, Karen, was it was a recognition brought to us by members that in some areas, like where I live in West Leeds, there's a really strong third sector offer. Most youth work is delivered by the third sector, but actually in some areas, including your area, that's not the case. And the council youth work team is the sort of stronger offer. So it was really to provide that specific flexibility. I just put in the chat, I went to your patch, Karen, which from where I live is like a day trip. It was really good. I went to the South East Youth Service and it was really impressive. And lots of young people there, well, up to the maximum that were allowed at the time. And it clearly has been very beneficial to people through the last 16 months, where they've done as much as they can at every stage.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Flynn, would you like to make the point that you put in the chat, just for the benefit of people that are watching and can't see it?
Okay, Alan, yes, thanks. It was just really to give them an early warning. Looking at the report, there's been a problem identified about communicating the message to youngsters who say they don't know about a lot of what's going on. Not an unusual message back. I've sat through God knows how many licensing meetings with taxi drivers, including major demonstrations outside the Civic Hall, because they feel they weren't, communicated properly with. That's not to say basically there's been no communications, but quite often we think the communications we're carrying out are sufficient when they're not. We should be looking at it from the other end. So essentially, although the report identifies the problem, it doesn't give any solutions to it. And in a later part of the report, it does talk about obviously resources being diverted into the deprived areas of the city, while also recognising that more affluent areas also have areas of deprivation, etc., etc. So it's really how that message is going to get across to everybody, not just in the deprived inner city, but outside as well, and that it's a consistent and common message to everybody.
Okay, who'd like to respond to that, please?
Do you want me to pick that up, Sam?
Yeah, sure, Ruth.
Although Councillor Flynn, Vicky Fuggles, our youth officer lead, couldn't come today. She's on leave, so she would be able to give you a bit more of a detailed response. What I can say is that we've set up a project team now to manage the implementation of the review. Just recognising there's quite a lot in the review that we really need to kind of get right and to drive forward. So the comms, the area around comms to young people is part of that project team. So in terms of the action plan moving forward, so I can get further details from Vicky and come back to you with it in terms of a more detailed response. But just to reassure you, it is part of that plan that the project team are driving and leading on.
Can I come back, Alan?
Absolutely.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks very much indeed for that. My concern is not that we're not good at communicating or whatever, because we all think we're brilliant at it. Quite often we're not. And it's how you actually make sure that the message you're passing out actually is received by the people who need it most. So I don't want, obviously, to go into any detail now, but I'd just like to know that the project team is looking at it from the other end and not just from the council end down.
Absolutely.
And I think, Councillor Flynn, that obviously there's, we've set out in the report the types of work that the youth service undertake, and part of that is, there is still the detached youth work. There is the work that goes on in terms of people on the streets in communities, and definitely need to max out those opportunities to be able to make sure that we are getting all the messages about what's available and offer out to some of those young people who are often more challenging for us to engage. So we have built that into the way that we've structured the review, and I think so we'll take that back into the project group to make sure that we cover that off in terms of how we intend to make that communication.
Thanks, Al.
Okay, thank you for that, Sal. I've got Councillor Gruen next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a clarification. The Bramley and Stanley Ward councillors were not able to attend the full briefing on the youth service reorganisation, but we were fortunate enough to have a tailor-made one organised for us instead, and so we had some quite detailed discussion. One of the things I just wanted to clarify while Councillor Harland and Sal were here is that in the LCC provision core offer that we're all still getting, provided by the council, it is still possible, is it not, for a third sector or other organisations to deliver that on behalf of the council. So it doesn't have to be delivered by council youth workers. If there isn't the resource there to do it, we can still commission other people for that LCC basic entitlement. That's the first question. And the second one is that my understanding of the smaller, of the two pots of grants there are in addition to that now, the smaller pot, I understand, is for really doing some quite exploratory work and work that takes more risks and is a bit more edge. I'm really excited by the possibility of having the luxury of being able to do that. And I just wondered if anybody had any examples of that kind of work that you could draw on for this purpose, because I think it's really good that we've actually given ourselves enough resource to move forward developmentally in the world of youth. I do have another question, which is about quality assurance, but I'll leave that there, Chair, and come back if I've got the time.
No problem. Thank you, Councillor Gruen. So, Councillor Harland, do you want to come in? And then I know Councillor Venner's indicated as well.
I think I'll leave it to Councillor Venner, who took this report through to the exec board. She's far more inside it than I have, that's just inherited it. But I'll leave that to Councillor Venner if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem. Councillor Venner, please.
Thank you. Just to respond to Councillor Gruen's question, in terms of the clarification point, no, what's currently being delivered in West Leeds by Barker and the Cardigan Centre will be delivered by the council's youth work service. There'll be council youth work in West Leeds, which there hasn't been to this point. However, there'll be a contract for Northwest, as there will also be for East Northeast and South Southeast, which only the third sector can bid for, and that'll be a 3 to 5 year contract. And I mean, the providers are aware of this, and Councillor Harland and I met Mark Law from Barker recently in his role of as Chair of Young Lives Leeds to look at this in more depth. We're particularly encouraging consortium bids for those longer term contracts. So the current providers could obviously bid for that third sector work, either either as single organisations or as a consortium. In terms of the small pots, so the idea of the longer term contracts was to provide stability to those third sector organisations, so that they know they've got that funding and they know how much they've got for 3 to 5 years to be able to deliver, consistent youth work. The idea of the small pots was to be able to respond flexibly as things come up. And as I said earlier, that can be bid for by either the third sector or the council. An example would be some of the work that's happened in Choppertown and Harehills around Bonfire Night, where organisations like Catch and Getaway Girls have been given some funding to do diversionary work, because we've had problems in the past with young people on the streets on firework nights, throwing fireworks and generally being disruptive. So that's an example. Similarly, some of the work around serious youth violence that's happening at the moment. So the idea is that as issues come up, we can bid for time limited discrete projects. It was about having that flexibility. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Venner. Councillor Gruen, I'll try and bring you back in on your other point. Does that answer all your questions for now?
It does, thank you.
Thank you very much. So Tony Britton is next, please.
First of all, thank you very much for the report, which I think is very comprehensive. But I'll ask you to allow me a certain amount of scepticism, since I've been on this committee quite a number of years, and we have a tremendous number of youth service reports, which all over the years have disappeared, partly because of funding, partly because of staffing difficulties. You tell us on this one that this will be implemented by the April 2022, in other words, next April. What I would raise the question is, are we guaranteed the staffing? Are we guaranteed the funding? And the other question is, on the there's a statement in there which says that we do not currently have an overall picture of the quality and impact of differing strands and providers of youth work in the city of Leeds. Have we now got that? And then it says it's not clear, consistent. It is not a clear, consistent, and publicised offer across the city. Have we now got that offer?
Sal, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, sure. So on the first point, we're on with all of the processes to meet that timescale for April 2022. The report has been through, the review has been through Executive Board, where the decision about the funding and the structure of the review was approved and agreed, and so will be implemented. One of the things that we are looking at moving into next year is whether there are some other alliances that we can make from the youth work services. One will be one of the reasons for having a very clear vision and structure for the youth work service was really that it enables us then to look at where we can join things up with other parts of the system. So particularly things, and the reason that we've now located it within Councillor Harland's portfolio is that link between youth and community work, and whether we can really max out the impact of what we're doing in the youth work service by bringing it to be more closely aligned with some of the community work that we undertake across the city. But also there are additional finances available nationally, and if we have a very clear offer and structure around youth work, then that puts us in a strong position to be able to make bids for that sort of funding. And that was part of the work that we did with the third sector, to say if we've got an absolutely clear and consistent approach to this, then we will be able to tap into organisations like the National Youth Association, who came up and spent time here in Leeds. So I want to reassure you on that. I think that we do have the plans in place. We've got this project team that's going to oversee the implementation, and so I'm confident that we'll be able to take that forward. The second point around the quality assurance, again, fed into the reason why we've set up the arrangements in the way that we have, so that we are able to much more clearly evidence the impact of the work that we're doing right across the city, but also that we put in place quality assurance processes that measure that impact, so that when we implement services, when we hand out the contracts that we're going to be doing, we'll be holding those organisations to account. But we're also building in that quality assurance to our own youth work service. I think it's sometimes been an area in the past where, because some of the engagement with youth work and community work is based on this idea of it being voluntary, that sometimes people have found it hard to describe the impact that it's having, although quite often what we do get is the feedback from, particularly from elected members, about how important it is to them in their communities. But what we're building in is the quality assurance mechanisms that will allow us to show impact. And so again, the project team will be leading on how we implement those, and that will be built into the commissioning that we're doing for the third sector part of the service. Was there a third aspect to your question, Tom?
Fine, thanks very much. I'm sure we'll come back to this issue because it's a thing that seems to come up regularly.
Yep. No, thank you, Tony. If I can just take Chair's privilege of following on from Tony's point, because like him, I've been on this board for a long time, and about 100 years ago, I was responsible for the youth service, and there's been similar issues recurring over that time. One of the things I find is there's sometimes the offer is patchy and different around the city. In some cases, there are community groups who do youth work better than we can in those communities. One springs to mind is the Hunslet Club, who I know have 800 young people attending on a Wednesday evening at 5 o'clock, which is astonishing, and a reach I don't think we could match anywhere in the city. But sometimes there's a culture, not everywhere, but in some parts of the service, that we know best. When it's blatantly apparent in some communities, we don't know best. And I'd like an assurance as part of this that where there is well-established provision like that, that actually we're deferring to them and learning from them and seeing how we can apply what they do in other parts of the city.
Thanks, Councillor Lamb. Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you've said, and I think part of how we arrived at the structure that we've come up with is entirely to tackle some of those issues, and so that's why in Councillor Venner's answer to Councillor Gruen, we have said that the core offer will be the core offer, so that there is a level of consistency in terms of what is provided by the local authority. You've got then some additionality that comes in terms of the contracts that will be on an area basis for the third sector, and then a mixed economy for smaller organisations. Some of the work that you're describing there about people very locally being able to build that kind of a response in their own communities fits into that part of it. But also, I think the bit that I've just talked about there, with in relation to the work with communities and environments, that's a really important aspect of this. And we did consult with organisations who have set up and developed in the way that you describe, with the recognition that they have reached that traditional services may well not. It's our intention that we really do max out that whole thing about, here's the core offer from the local authority, here's the third sector offer, here are the smaller grants that are available, and how does that link to community development and organisations that set themselves up because they are driven by the needs of their very localised communities.
Okay, thank you for that, Sal. I would Councillor Emma Flint next, please.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I am youth work trained and have 3 teenagers, so I really welcome the report and all the work that's gone into it. I just wondered if in the way forward, is there a way to kind of formalize opportunities to share good practice? So I think there's just such brilliant youth work happening throughout the city, like in small ways, but a lot of people don't know about it. And I think there could be some really good learning from things that are already happening. And youth workers, in my experience, are very generous in kind of sharing ideas. And I think it would be good for the city if there was kind of established ways to kind of for that to happen. And that, particularly youth work where young people are encouraged to take the lead. I think, the best way of engaging young people is not to provide programs that are done to them, but to kind of, encourage ideas from them and follow their interests and issues that they care about. And there's good work happening in the city where that, is really taking place, and where the young people are invested in and are kind of central to the service that is happening. And I think that's the most effective way. So it's just a question about sharing good practice. Thank you.
So thank you for that, and a really helpful, insightful comments that you made there. One of the things that we did as part of as we were developing some of the review, the other thing that we were really conscious of was what we were hearing back from people in terms of how valued the services are. But we weren't necessarily picking up the same value from the people who are engaged in the work, and so we really wanted to try and improve the esteem and status for youth work. And I think one of the ways in which we wanted to do that was by having that really clear vision about saying this is how we want youth work to look in our city. These are the things and the principles that we base really good quality youth work on, and these are worth celebration. So unfortunately, obviously, we've had the pandemic in the last year, but prior to that, we did hold the first citywide youth work conference, which was entirely for that purpose, which was to kind of give it a sense of status, to celebrate the work that people are doing. Young people contributed to the contributions. We had people from the profession contributing, third sector involved, National Youth Association came along. And so I think as it's our intention to continue with that on an annual basis once we've through the pandemic, to really give that status a lead from the top in terms of saying this is really important for the city, but to use it as an opportunity to celebrate and learn from all the various different types of work that we can then showcase across the piece. But I also think that learning that you've described will be built into that quality assurance process that we're developing, and so we'll take that back through the project team to ensure that peer learning is built into what we're doing.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Sal. And currently the list of people wanting to contribute is getting longer rather than shorter. So if I could encourage brevity, but without stifling the debate. So next on the list is Councillor Lay, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Interesting report. It's just a couple of areas I want to tease out a bit more information, really, as a new member of this committee, really. If I'm right, I understand that there's this sort of continuum, this spectrum between universal provision that the council provides something like a youth activities fund for, that provides for universal service, right through to targeted services in our most deprived and our most difficult to reach communities and young people, etc. And my questions really come off of page 24 of the report, if people have got the report in. So we talk about no ward having a reduction in council delivered youth work. That's pleasing, because obviously we've all, due to budget cuts, seen cuts over a number of years. I just wanted to sort of tease out, because it says that youth work youth work addresses issues faced by all young people, irrespective of their background. And of course, coming from a semi-rural community like Otley and Yeadon, or a major settlement outside of the city and outside of that sort of inner outer ring road, we as ward members see lots of pressures, and some of it is alluded to about mental health, peer pressure, bullying, etc. And then 2 paragraphs later, it talks about having a greater focus on the more deprived areas. And I'm just wondering how we get the balance. I can understand how we function, because I can see the formula about 40% of 11 to 17-year-olds and 60% on deprived areas. But there's no correlation to say, well, actually, there are non-deprived areas that have youth work issues, because we recognise it ourselves in the paragraph after that says there's poor mental health, there's peer pressure. So I'd like to understand where this youth work fits in that sort of universal at one end, targeted at the other end, and to be reassured that there is going to still be a focus in our rural and semi-rural areas, because we make reference to county lines and other problems. And from our communities, we've also seen cuts in other areas. So that's where the second part of my question comes about working together. We have less police officers, less police community support workers in our areas. How are we working with schools and clusters in our major settlements, in places like where we live? I can understand how we're working together in the more deprived area, and that's really what I'm trying to tease out, if I can, that we're not forgetting the rural communities like my own. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. I can certainly relate to those points. Sal.
So thanks, Councillor. I mean, I think what we recognise that there's been reductions over the years, and this part of this review was about ensuring that there wasn't a reduction in any given area from the core offer that we're making from the local authority. And as Councillor Venner outlined earlier on, there were areas where there was no core offer provided by the local authority. So we're working through that to make sure that from that universal and targeted approach that we take, that all of the city is covered. Part of the role of our staff, and I think part of some of the strengths that we've identified that we've had fed back to us through this process of consultation has been about the fact that they understand and link to their local communities, and part of their role makes sure that they, whether it is a rural community or inner city community, that they've got the right links and relationships across those communities to make sure that where children and young people need a service, that is provided. Now, whilst so the other bit of that again is the point that you're making there about reductions in public services in general, that is forcing people to kind of look at what else is there in a particular area and how do we join those things up. And I think part of that pushes the bit about politically we have sat the youth work service in Councillor Harlan's portfolio in order to be able to pull on those links across the communities and environments portfolio, but also with other partners and stakeholders. But we've kept it professionally within children's services because of the link to on the ground, the link to all of the early help work that we do, all of the other early help services that there are, particularly our early help hubs, but also the relationships that are critical with the schools and the clusters and the capacity that we can tap into there. So we are, it is our plan to make sure that there is a continued service right across the city.
Okay, thank you, Sal. Councillor Illingworth, please.
Yes, Chair, thank you. Yes, I was echoing the comments of previous speakers last few minutes. I would like to see a much more detailed breakdown of the cash flows involved in this delivery. I'm amazed, I'm delighted by the report, essentially. I'm thrilled to bits, saying it's excellent, moving in the right direction. How will it be paid for? How can we afford to do this? And how will the money distribute down to individual local areas? I think that's a question where I'd like more information. To know what's changed after the depression of the last 10 years and the endless rounds of cuts. There's some light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm amazed and delighted that it is possible.
Thanks, Councillor Illingworth. Councillor Venner, were you looking to come in on this one?
Yeah, I mean, John, nothing's changed. Obviously, the council had to make the administration had to make really difficult decisions last year when we were doing the budget setting about where we would cut we were looking at a deficit of 118 million.
Indeed.
For this financial year. And it was absolutely a political decision not to cut youth work. I mean, youth work has had about 3 million taken out of it up to this point. The service has reduced from 5 million to 2 million over the last 10 years, but we didn't cut youth work when we did cut other areas. Children's services were very protected in the budget cuts, and within children's services, youth work was very protected. So it's not that it's got additional money, but it's that we've protected it. And the way the formula's worked out is I mean, we can give you the detail, obviously, if you want it, but it's basically a percentage attached to deprivation and a percentage attached to population. And as I've said before on this board, the wards of the highest deprivation have the highest birth rate. So Gipton and Hare Hills has the most children living in that area, and it's the most deprived wards of all 33 in the city. So that's how the formulas works out. There is some additional analysis, having just said what I have, in that the money that Councillor Blake, when she was Councillor Blake before she was a Baroness, the money that she pledged for children and young people's mental health is in this pot in the life coach workers, which will become part of the team of the council's internal youth work service, and that gives them the capacity to do more individual work in all wards of the city. That will be in all 33 wards. So life coaches will be able to do individual work with young people where particular issues are identified, like mental health. And the other thing about keeping a youth work service is there are some opportunities in the current climate around attracting more money for youth work. There is a recognition nationally that the fallout of the pandemic is falling very, very heavily on young people, and there's also a lot of concern about serious youth violence. And in Glasgow, you had a really good opportunity of a city turning the curve on that through youth work, and that's given youth work a really good profile nationally. But if we're going to attract more funding, like through the Violence Reduction Unit or through other sources, we have to have a youth work to be invested in. So part of keeping a youth work is about being able to attract more investment. Some of that's money that may come to the council, like through the Violence Reduction Unit, but also the partnership with the third sector. And I've worked at Barker and the Marketplace in terms of our own, our youth work charities in the city. They're charities, so they can apply for funding we can't apply for. They can apply to charitable trusts and match fund, in effect, funding we give them. So they bring additionality in being able to attract more resource into the city, as well as the additionality they bring through the fantastic work they do and the better reach they often have as community-based organisations. Thank you.
Thank you. That really is helpful, is that? And thank you for it.
Okay, thank you for that. Celia is next, please.
Thank you. Yes, it's good to see youth service again being a focus, and I'm just wondering about traveller children, young people. I may have missed it. I mean, a lot of specific groups are mentioned in the document, but is there any strategic provision being made? I know we've got 3 static sites in Leeds, and one of the high schools I've worked at did take a number of children from those sites, and there are times when they're put under a lot of pressure. So just wondered if there's provision for addressing their issues.
So Benza, do you want to come in a second on what we're doing in terms of looking at some of those challenges? I mean, they are part of the communities that we serve. We do have specific Gypsy Roma Traveller services affiliated with the youth service, but Councillor Benner is taking the lead on looking at the issues in terms of how well we support those communities more broadly as well.
Yeah, I'll just be really brief. Yeah, because Gypsies and Travellers are in all our portfolios on the Cabinet, so it was agreed amongst the Cabinet that I'd take the lead on doing some specific work around the Gypsy and Traveller community. We're looking at various issues, including negotiated stopping, particularly because of the implications of the Police Crime and Sentencing Bill for Gypsies and Travellers. In my adults portfolio, there's a huge issue of mental health and suicide in the community, and on the children's side, our biggest priority is the lack of access to education. So we are doing some really focused work with the Gypsy and Traveller Exchange, GATE, who are the charity in Leeds who support the community, and a predominant, I think half their trustees and half their staff are from the Gypsy and Traveller community, so they're a really good advocacy organisation. As Sal said, we do have youth work that specifically supports the community, but also youth workers will work really flexibly as needed. So over lockdown, I had a number of encampments in my own ward, one of which had a lot of children, and the youth service came in really quickly and did some direct work with the kids just while they were with us, which wasn't for very long. So yes, it is quite a big focus for the council at the moment, and the youth work is engaged with the Gypsy and Traveller community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
So does that answer your question, Celia?
Yes, thank you. That's interesting to know.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Forsyth next, please. Thank you for your patience.
Right, thank you. I'll try to be brief. So thank you very much for the report and for us being given the opportunity to discuss this in detail. I do welcome the link with the communities putting the working together, so that's very good. And thank you as well for the opportunity for ward councillors to, in the more deprived wards, to have been consulted on that. So that's a very good move as one in the northwest areas. And so this is quite a specific question, really. In the third sector organisations that will be applying, will there be any mapping to ensure that what they're planning to do will cover all of those particular areas that they are applying for? I don't know if I've explained myself very well, but for example, Barker, will there be a mapping to ensure that all of the areas that are having enhanced provision will be provided for? I'm just wondering if there's a plan for that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Councillor Forsyth. So yes, that will be set out as part of the commission that people will tender again. So they'll need to cover off how all the organisation will meet those needs that are set out in that specification. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Renshaw, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered if, I know we've had like a long period of austerity, and I'm really pleased to see this youth paper come into children's services at last. And I just wondered about the mobile provision and the state of those vehicles that they use for the mobile youth service, because obviously they're aging, and I just wondered if anything was being set aside to either replace them or upgrade them or update them, because technology moves on and so does everything else with it. And they've had, because there's no real buildings in many areas that the youth service can access, I just wondered how we were going to upgrade those vehicles for the mobile youth provision.
Councillor Renshaw, I mean, I don't know the detail of that. I don't know if Ruth does. I think, but what I would say but we can come back to you with a more detailed answer unless Ruth's got a vehicle condition report on to her fingertips. But part of that whole idea around the link with communities' environments is also about making sure that we are maximising all of the resources that we've got across the council and the third sector. So buildings are one of those things that we're doing that mapping exercise for, to ensure that where we do need that type of provision, we're looking right across the council to see what's available. But unless Ruth does know about the vehicles, we'll come back to you with a bit more detail on that outside the meeting.
Sal, I can come in just to say, Councillor Renshaw, that it is on our agenda, and we've already identified that it is a need just in terms of looking at those vehicles. So I don't have the finer detail in terms of how it's going to look, but it is absolutely on the agenda. And as Sal mentions as well, we're working really closely with Safer Communities and our asset management colleagues around the buildings as well, just in terms of trying to increase now that centre-based provision, but also, you know, to do that as safely as we possibly can. So we're kind of slowly moving towards being able to enhance that, and particularly over the summer. But I can get you some more detail as well if it's helpful.
Yeah, that would be really helpful, thank you, because I do know that sometimes the youth service has difficulty because of the sudden issues with the vehicles, and I don't want to think that young people can't receive that quality service in the South East that they do currently get due to the breakdown of a vehicle. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Renshaw. Councillor Gruen, you said you had one more point that you wanted to make, I think.
If you've got time on this item, Chair.
Yeah, go ahead, then we'll wrap up after that.
It was a comment, first of all, on there's mention in the report of the youth work curriculum. And that's the first time I've ever heard that term. And I'm assuming it means the curriculum for those who are training to be youth workers, rather than any curriculum for young people. Just clarification on that, really. And the other thing is there's quite a lot of reference to what Sal referred to earlier in the debate about quality and outcome monitoring. Quality assurance of youth work is something I've banged on about ever since I was first elected as a councillor. And I was just wondering what form that would take and how you do actually gain qualitative information about impact of youth work. So I think that's an absolutely crucial measure. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Gruen. Councillor Venner, did you want to come back on that one?
Yes, yeah, the National Youth Work Curriculum, that's right. It's produced by the National Youth Agency. It's a very positive move forward, really, and for us it kind of fits with things like the Youth Work Conference that Sal mentioned earlier, because particularly having worked in youth work services, though not as a youth worker actually, but as a councillor, but I've been really passionate about youth workers should have the same parity as teachers and social workers in terms of the respect for their profession and their particular skills, and that's a campaign the National Youth Agency is very strong on. So yes, it's about the training of youth workers rather than a curriculum for young people.
I'm nodding in agreement, but of course you can't see me. I agree that youth workers in equal status. It's a very skilled job.
Yeah, what was the second thing you asked, Councillor Gruen?
It was about quality assurance.
Oh yeah. Similarly, this is something I've really pushed on in the role I've been in. Not least because in having delivered third sector services for a long time, it felt like we were always very monitored and evaluated, and that wasn't always replicated in terms of the council's internal service. So yes, we want to have a really clear monitoring and evaluation framework for youth work across the city that covers both our internal service and our external. And I know we've been in some of the same meetings where we've both been saying, this is telling us how many people physically came to the youth work session. It doesn't tell us anything about the outcome of that. So, and I think I mean, you'd set the monitoring and evaluation within the contract specification. It'd be part of the contract specification. And you would want some output related data, like how many people attend events and from what areas. But the outcomes, well, you would set the outcomes according to what you wanted to achieve. So outcomes might be around less people being neat. They might be about reduced loneliness and isolation, better capacity to manage mental health, for example. Less risk around self-injury, county lines, depending on the work that you're doing with individual young people. And there are various tools you can use to monitor that, and you can monitor short, medium and long-term outcomes. So you can ask young people to just give you feedback on a particular session in terms of, do you feel better having left than you did when you arrived? Similarly, though, if you're working with young people over a long period of time, you can monitor things like whether they can, manage their mental health better, whether they're attending school more. So you'd set some monitoring evaluation, you'd set a broad monitoring evaluation framework within the contract, and then in reporting on that contract, the individual organisations would also set out how they were going to monitor those outcomes, and that would be a mix of quantitative and qualitative feedback. And you could do case studies as well in terms of more in-depth looking at particular young people and the work organisations have done with them. Sorry, that seems a bit waffly coming out of my mouth. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it's really encouraging. Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Venner.
Okay, right. Well, thank you, everybody. That's all the contributions that we had. So hopefully you've all found that a useful session. I think what we need to think about is how we keep a watching brief over this, because it all sounds great, but it's really what is the impact, what are the outcomes, as has just been discussed. So I don't know if Sal has a particular view, but I'm wondering if perhaps we ask for this to come back maybe around March, April, in advance of it going live next year, for an update as to where we've got to. Does that sound reasonable, Sal? Have we lost Sal?
I'll answer for him. I think it sounds very me. I'm sure Councillor Harlan would be okay with that as well. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure Angela will have captured that there's quite a few bits of specific information I think the board would like to see as part of that update, and really it is measuring impact. And I'd quite how to do it, I don't know, maybe through case studies. But as always, it would be really useful to understand how young people feel about the service that have used it. And if there's any way to get the views of those who don't access the service and the reasons why they don't access it, I think that would be useful to hear as well, if that's possible.
Sorry, Councillor, I did crash out there, I think, for a while, but happy to bring that back. The work around what the quality assurance will look like, will be managed by the project team, but it absolutely has to have at its heart the views and responses from young people, and we will. There is that bit of an attempt to capture anything that we can from young people that don't find it helpful or don't feel that it is able to engage them. But obviously there are difficulties with that, but it should still be something that we should try and capture.
Okay, right. Well, thank you very much for that. So that's been a useful session. So we're moving on now to the item on exclusions, elective home education and off-rolling. The purpose of this item is, as members will remember, we gave a commitment to recommence our inquiry work this year in relation to this issue. And so the report that you've got provides a summary of the work undertaken so far by the board, as well as presenting the latest data that will assist members in determining the appropriate next steps. So what we're looking for is the views of members and officers. So obviously the world has moved on quite a bit, but it doesn't mean this issue is any less important to us. And we've expressed repeatedly that we do want to come back to it. So the purpose of this is really a scoping exercise so that Angela can capture precisely what we want to look at now, what the next steps are, who we want to take evidence from, and are there any other co-optees that we might want to come and have input into the inquiry going forward. There's always a risk when we do this that we actually start running an inquiry session, which we need to try and avoid, but members should feel free to make comments or ask questions that will just help us to scope out where we're going to go next. And if it feels like we're straying into an inquiry already, then I will just gently step in and rein us back on track. So we've got, we should have Councillor Pryor, Councillor Venner and Sal staying with us. I don't know if Councillor Harland is going to stick around. You're more than welcome as always.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. No, I'll take my leave if that's okay, but thank you for all your contributions. This is all very new to me, but I'm on a really exciting journey, and thanks to Sal and Ruth also for today, but to Councillor Venner for filling in and watching my back, so to speak. But thank you very much, and see you all soon.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Harland. So if I could ask Val and then Dave just to introduce themselves, please.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Val Waite. I am Head of Learning Inclusion in Children and Families.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Dave Clark. I'm the Head of Learning Improvement with Children and Families.
Okay, thank you very much. So if I can ask Sal initially just to share any views that he has at this point on where we've got to and where he sees the important next steps for the inquiry, and then I'll ask the executive members to chip in, and then we can go into comments from board members and responses or questions if that's appropriate. So over to you, Sal, please.
Yeah, thanks. I will bring Val in on this bit, Councillor Lamb, because I think she'd had consistent involvement in the inquiry from the beginning. And there's some updated data that Val might just share with you that may help guide how we want to take this forward. And also just about when the specific data releases are around the information that we will have, so that it can productively form part of the inquiry as we move forward. So I don't know, Val, if you want to just give a bit of that overview, and then Councillor Pryor may have some views as well.
Yeah, no problem, Sal, thank you. Yes, so we presented lots of information on exclusion, on fixed term exclusion and permanent exclusion, also on elective home education. I think it was last November was really the full report. Usually we provide reports around the November time, because the data that we get from the DFE, the verified data on exclusion, comes through to local authorities in the July. And then you need time to compare that to the information we get in through census as a local authority, and also then to analyse that data, verify it, and then produce reports. So it's usually about November time that we're able to put all of that information together and then be able to present it back to boards. So that's sort of the context around this. Of course, the data is always lagged. So the information that we get that is on fixed term exclusion is always lagged. And so the last data that we had that was verified was 2018, 2019. So although we do get information from individual schools reporting into the local authority, that's usually again a term lagged, and it's not verified, and we do find that there are inconsistencies in the overall picture to that we do get back from the DFE. We also need to consider within the whole of this picture as well that, as we're all very aware, it has not been a usual situation, over the last, 15, 16 months now, more than that, in terms of COVID. So exclusions as such within schools were suspended because of course schools were stood down, and we only had children attending with education, health and care plans, and those that were vulnerable. So we have been in a situation where we are not able to analyse the data over a long period of time, or where actually we were not accepting fixed term exclusions because fixed term exclusions were not operating during that period of COVID. So there's lots of things, I suppose, that I'm saying that's around the entire context of where we compare data that we previously had 2018-19 to data that we have currently got. However, we have got some recent unverified data that is starting to come in, that we're starting to collect within the local authority. And what we have started to do with that data is actually contact the schools themselves to ask if we can support in any way, if we can support them in looking at the individual young people that may be subject to fixed term exclusion, where we can pull a team around those particular children so we can have a holistic perspective around them. So we have started some project work, pilot work that is around those, particularly in the east of the city, where we know that there is high levels of deprivation and lots of poverty, and there's a high correlation there between children either not attending school or them being fixed term excluded from school. And also a project in the west of the city where the information at the moment, although unverified, that data, and we have to be very cautious with that, is looking as if we have higher numbers of fixed term exclusions in the west. So we've already started 2 of those projects off, talking to partners, and from September we'll be rolling those out, and that will be a multi-agency response working with the schools to work with those young people and those families. In terms of elective home education, I think that last time I was reporting, it looked as if the numbers in elective home education were going down. We'd had quite a few young people that were returning back into school, and that was around the February, March time. What we have now seen yet again is actually numbers in elective home education rising. So we have now got around about 900 young people that are being electively home educated within the city. The normal figure for Leeds is around about 650 per year. So you can see that's a significant number. And then through COVID, it rose to about 840, something like that. And now it is rising yet again. When we've started to look at that data and that information, it seems to be families rather than individual young people that belong to a family. It also seems to be connected to particular cohorts or groups. So the BAME community, there's a high representation there within the BAME community of elective home education. We're seeing less key stage 4 young people, those going towards exams, that are elective home education. And the other group that we're starting to see are those who are not wanting to return to school with the reasons that are given that are due to high levels of anxiety due to COVID, and also those families where we've started to look at attendance levels and started to look at processing around attendance. And families are feeling that they don't want their young people to go back into school as yet. It could well be that that picture changes in September, and that families are waiting until we've got through the summer period. They just felt that actually returning to school was just a little too soon, you know, this term. So by the end of the autumn term, we should be able to again look at the picture around elective home education, the number of new notifications, and the number of young people that are returning back into school. Okay, I hope that is helpful in the overview.
Okay, thank you, Val. And I don't know if Councillor Pryor wanted to add anything at this point or just hang fire for questions.
Yeah, that was incredibly thorough from Val, so I'm happy to hang fire for questions.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Pryor. So just by way of reminder, there's 4 things really that we need to consider. One is around timescales to recommence the inquiry work. My view, and I'll see if others share it, given what's been said about the timing of data, it seems to me it would make sense to look to November or December to pick this up again, so that we're working with the freshest data that we've got rather than looking back and it will also give a bit of time for things to settle down again at school and have an idea of how things are playing out in the new term. So that's the first point. The second is any further key areas and information that we want to explore as part of the evidence base. Thirdly, are there any key witnesses we want to engage with in future evidence sessions? And finally, are there any other co-optees we should be considering to join us as part of the inquiry? So there are a few people have indicated already, but if you kind of keep those four things in mind, and if anyone wants to express a particularly strong view on any of those things, that would be really helpful. So I've got Tony, first of all, please.
First of all, I would agree that November seems to be a suitable time to start, because it does mean we'll have more information on it. Because I noticed from some of the information given that there are big gaps in that. So, for example, on the home education notification, the unknown numbers don't appear for 18, 19 or 19, 20, which could make a significant difference, because looking to the way the other years that we have got the figures. The other thing is that I'm quite concerned at the figures for exclusions for East Leeds. Everywhere else seems to be quite low, but East Leeds seems to be over. Is that the same school? Is that all the schools taken into account, or is that one school or what? Because it is quite worrying. And I do notice in this morning's Bible, i.e. the Yorkshire Evening Post, that there is a scheme up in the East Leeds, which has got run by some ex-policemen, which would in actual fact be useful to call in to give evidence, since it seems to be having an impact in the area.
Okay, thank you for that, Tony. I'm sure Angela's made a note of that. Is there anyone like to respond to those points?
Could I just qualify? Is that for fixed term exclusions, Tony, rather than exclusions?
So you were on mute there, Tony.
According to the
No, you've muted again.
According to the figures, it's permanent exclusions for 1920.
Okay, thank you. So anyone want to respond to it? I mean, some of these things will just be comments and not necessarily need a response at this stage.
So Val's got a hand up.
Okay, Val, go ahead.
Yeah, just to respond in terms of permanent exclusions, I think we do have to put it in context that as a city we have got the lowest number of permanent exclusions in the country. We're in the top quartile for exclusions, so we've got very, very low numbers. And some of those did pertain to one particular area within the city. Often we do find that as new academies come into the city, and we start to work with those academies of what support is available to them and what we can put in place. So we have to remember as well that that was last year and things have changed, throughout the year. But that, yes, we did have a picture where we did have a few exclusions from particular areas within the city, but it is such small numbers, when you compare that to the national picture.
I don't think it really matters about comparing it to the national picture. The fact that we've got in one area of the city, 15 kids have been excluded permanently from school is a matter of concern.
I would agree with you. Absolutely, it is of concern, and we are working with that area of the city.
Okay, thank you for that. So it's Councillor Marshall-Cattung next, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Val, for your thorough update. Two questions here, and I'm asking specifically on the fixed term exclusions and elective home education. Could we ask, and I'm glad with the timescales that you have given as well, could we ask for the information on schools in the city with the highest numbers of both fixed term, if that's possible? So if that could be provided to us, and Chair, could I ask that we actually invite the head teachers or CEOs of those schools with the highest number to our next our next meeting, where we're going to be dealing with this, if that's all right.
Yeah, that seems sensible to me, Councillor Marshall-Catung. So I'm sure Angela's got that noted down. So next on the list, I have Councillor Forsyth, please.
Oh, right. Thank you very much. One of my first points about areas to explore has just been mentioned, about sort of seems to be some schools with much higher levels of exclusion. So that's one area to explore. On the timescales, I would agree with November, December. Sounds good. Other areas to explore. So there was a note, right, it was said in the report pointing out about there being the 5 extra areas which are for reasons for exclusion, and about school behaviour policies, the advice that school behaviour policies needed to be updated. So I do wonder whether that should be a particular area of focus as to how that might be panning out. My other concern is about the education plans for the EHE pupils and how those are assessed. And presumably with this great increase in the numbers who are opting for home education, I mean, how that's working out really, because so a bit of a question really is, how is an education plan deemed not suitable? You know, what's the criteria for that really? And I'm particularly concerned, obviously, about the pupils who've got education plans who are as special needs as well. So those are, yes, particular areas. As the key witnesses, if we were able to actually take any information from any who are homeschooled, especially if it's whole families who are thinking who are now doing that, and also possibly those who've been permanently excluded in the past. I don't know whether that would be possible, but it would seem to be a good idea for key witnesses if that was a possibility. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Forsyth. So I've got Kate next, please.
Thank you. I was just going to say that I recall when we were looking at this previously that we did have some data provided, and it was quite interesting to scrutinise that. I remember looking, I seem to recall, I might be wrong in my recollection of this, Val, but I seem to remember that our figures for Leeds were really good on permanent exclusion, but not so good on fixed term. I might have misremembered that. But and I recall making a point previously around the fact that obviously schools are free to set their own behaviour policies, and that some seem to opt for a much more traditional, I suppose, hardline policy, whereas others go for more of a restorative justice type policy. And it would just be interesting to look at if there's any correlation between, I don't know if we can do this, if it's practical or not, but if there's any correlation between the numbers of fixed term or permanent exclusions and the type of behaviour policy that they have in place, and how closely those individual schools are actually following the statutory guidance on exclusions as well. And in terms of witnesses, I completely agree that if we can hear from children, young people and families directly, that would be really informative. And I think it's really important as well to give them a voice. And I think it will give us a much more accurate picture too, in terms of impact. I think COVID obviously has really muddied the waters, because we had quite a clear picture before. And obviously now things are much more, much less clear. And November maybe will be a good time to look initially, but I think it will be interesting to look a bit further down the line, because I'd be interested to know how, you know, the difficulties that children and young people have faced as a result of the COVID pandemic, and how that impacts in terms of their behaviour, and how schools are then looking to manage that going forward, and whether there is more of a shift towards in terms of managing behaviour within school, and how that then impacts on exclusion rates, and also just the elective home education figures. I think, you know, that's really worrying. that they've gone up, because we know from the imposed home education on children that it impacted on socialisation and mental health, and well, in lots of ways. And I think we need to sort of look quite closely at, you know, where it is genuinely a choice and where it's families feel it's sort of imposed on them, although they're making that choice, and it's sort of imposed on them by virtue of the effects of the pandemic. So they're just sort of different areas that I'd kind of like to look at a bit more closely. Sorry, I've rambled a bit.
No, that's helpful, Kate. Thank you very much. Next, I've got Councillor Stevenson, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just an observation. I think when we first started this piece of work, I think it was possibly getting on for nearly 2 years ago now, and the picture has changed somewhat. I think those schools that were further up the league table, if you will, have now moved down, and others have moved up, and the picture is quite transient. And I think, given the year we've had, getting an accurate picture of where we are is going to be quite difficult. I think in terms of timescales, from my point of view, I would be saying that in the sort of October, November time, we really ought to be having an update on those elective home education stats to see whether we've managed, and from a board point of view, we'd be looking at what work has gone in from the council to build confidence with those families who are reluctant to come back into school because of COVID, etc. So we could have a look back at that and see some actual data possibly at that point, and then probably push forward the bits around exclusions, etc., maybe into spring 22, where we'll have a good amount of data hopefully by then. Even if it's not hard data, it'll be sort of localized data to see where we are at that point and what we can do, and at that point have a conversation with the invitees that we just mentioned, just so we can actually look at where we are at now. My fear would be that otherwise we could end up having a conversation as a board, and we could end up pointing fingers at certain schools based on information that's now rapidly out of date, and doesn't reflect where the city is now. So, and that'll be my view. I think the focus, first of all, ought to be on that elective home education and see what we're doing around that, given the impact COVID's had.
Okay, thank you for that. Helen is next, please, and then Celia.
Sorry, you took me by surprise then. Yeah, just to ask, how strong are the links between the youth groups and those schools where there are higher levels of permanent or temporary exclusions in the city?
I wonder if, Helen, if that might be something to hang fire until we're actually doing the inquiry. But if officers can be prepared to bring us some information about that when we pick it up, that would be useful, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. And then also, just to reiterate what Kate said, it'd be interesting to know how kind of sanction leaning or restorative leaning the behaviour policies are in those schools where they don't have high levels of exclusions, particularly in difficult areas of the city.
Yeah, thank you for that. So Celia is next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this relates, my first point relates to the point that Kate brought up about behaviour policy. I noticed the numbers of exclusions for physical and verbal assaults on pupils and on staff. So I'm thinking maybe looking, and it could be through looking at the behaviour policies, how those returns to school are managed in order that the staff and pupils feel safe and it's a successful return. A number of pupils are kept at home because they feel they are bullied. and parents want to keep them safe. So it relates sometimes to the non-attenders. And going on off-rolling, I'm wondering if it'd be interesting looking at the figures for off-rolling. We've not had exams, have we, for a couple of summers? Comparing the figures for off-rolling during times when we have exams and times when we didn't have exams because of COVID.
Okay, thank you, Celia. And then if I can just chip in one thought I have on evidence gathering. In my ward in Wetherby, we have I think the PC name is the Secure College of Learning, or the Young Offenders Institution, which the last time I visited, I think there were 272 young people there. And it would be interesting to hear some of their stories, because in many cases, the temporary exclusions followed by permanent exclusions start a spiral rather than actually resolving the issue, and it'd be useful to hear some of their stories and perhaps what could have been done differently, because my view always when I go there is we've failed every single one of them that's in there, and it's useful to understand the journey they've been on to get there. So I don't know, Angela, if that's something we could perhaps organise a small working group to go and visit and talk to some of those young people and hear their experiences. So that's everyone who wanted to contribute. So I don't know if Councillor Pryor or Sal or Val or Dave have any other thoughts they want to contribute on what's been said, or any particular things they would like to highlight before I ask Angela to sum up.
Nothing major. I think that all makes sense. I think having the meeting covering this in October, November, was it? I think that makes sense as well. So you've got kind of the most recent data, and actually as next academic year will be the first having exams in a while. I think it makes sense to have that early on in that academic year, which it would fall. So yeah, just an agreement there.
Okay, thank you. Sal, anything from you, or Val or Dave?
No, from my point of view, I'm happy with those contributions. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. So Angela, would you be happy just to sum up on what you've captured from there and just summarise what the next steps will be for us?
Yeah, certainly. So in terms of the 4 areas, so what I've captured, I think we've all agreed the timing, so no earlier than November, so we'll probably schedule the first session in the November board meeting. In terms of key areas, there's been discussion about, I know we mentioned about permanent exclusions, but are there particular key areas across the city that we would need to look at in particular? Information about schools with the highest fixed term exclusion numbers, would be good to have that data. School behaviour policies was certainly a key issue raised in terms of the type of policies, any correlations in terms of over the past year as well, and how schools are dealing with the return of schools and the impact of young people during the pandemic as well. In November, particularly looking at the rates of elective home education and what work's been done since families have returned in the autumn term, particular links with youth work provision, any correlations there in terms of the data, looking at figures of off-rolling, again, particularly reflecting on the last year, and in terms of key witnesses, looking to invite head teachers or representatives of schools, certainly, and they'll gauge the appropriate timing of that as part of the terms of reference. Certainly about getting the views of young people and their families, particularly those that are linked with elective home education and pupils who have been permanently excluded as well, and linked to that about getting the experiences of young offenders. We've not touched upon about co-opted members, and we can pick that up at the next meeting if you would like to. I do know that there has been work done by the third sector in particular, in Young Lives Leeds, around exclusions. So I think last month we did talk about perhaps having a standard co-opted member, but that co-opted member perhaps could be a representative that has primarily undertaken the work around exclusions. That might be an option that the board would like to think about. So hopefully I've covered quite the wide range there that we've just discussed. What will happen next is that will then be reflected into a draft terms of reference document that I will be bringing back to the next meeting, formal meeting of the board. So there will be a further opportunity to check that we're happy with the scope before we do start undertaking and resuming the inquiry again. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you for that, Angela. I think that captures everything very well. Celia, you wanted to come in?
If I may, Chair, just adding to what the point you made about the Secure College of Learning, there's also Adelbeck that comes under the authority. That might prove interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that, Celia. Okay, okay, so I'm sure Angela's noted that. So that brings that item to a close. So the next item on the agenda is the work schedule. So as usual, I'll hand over to Angela to introduce that item.
Thank you, Chair. So this report relates to the board's forthcoming work schedule. So last month, members discussed possible areas of work for the board to undertake this year. And so the latest version of the board's work schedule, which is set out in Appendix 1, has been drafted to reflect the board's discussion. But members are asked at this stage to consider and discuss whether they would like to make any suggested changes at this stage. Obviously, reflecting on the discussion we've just had, I will provisionally look at putting some evidence sessions in there for next time as well. Within the main body of the report, reference is also made to the board's draft report around tackling the long-term impact of COVID-19 on children and families. So again, during the board's last meeting, it was noted that as well as monitoring and helping to inform some of the immediate responses needed during the COVID-19 pandemic, the former Scrutiny Board had used its final meeting in March to begin exploring what the potential long-term impacts of COVID are likely to be on children and their families. At that stage, it was proposed that a draft report summarising the board's views and potential recommendations arising from its March discussion, but also reflecting developments since March, be considered and formally approved by the board during July meeting. But as this is now a consultative meeting, the board's unable to formally approve the report today. However, as part of this work schedule item, the chair would still like to provide an opportunity for members to share any initial views that members may have on the draft report at this stage, so that this can be reflected as part of a final draft, which will then be brought to the next formal public meeting for approval. So a copy of the draft report was circulated separately to board members in advance of today's meeting. And if the board's happy to discuss the report today, then we can also arrange for it to be made publicly available on the council's website as supplementary information immediately following this meeting. So I'll pass back to you now, Chair.
Thank you, Angela. So any comments on either the work programme in general, or does anybody want to make any comments on the report that Angela referred to? I've got Councillor Renshaw, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think it would be helpful, or useful at least, to have a report from the children's centres and early years, because a lot of the children's sector services, as far as I'm aware, have been impacted on by the COVID, and they've been doing outreach work to families of young people. So I think it would be useful to have a report from the early years sector.
Yeah, I think we usually schedule that in at some point during the year anyway. I can't remember exactly when, but I'm sure we can make that happen anyway, Councillor Renshaw. Councillor Venner, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a couple of comments on the draft report. I think it's really good. These are things I thought should be added. I thought what was there was excellent. Although it's referred to extensively in the report, and also when the young people came to us, they talked extensively about this. Mental health is referred to in the body of the report quite a lot, but there isn't a recommendation that relates to mental health. And I wondered if you wanted to put in something about continuing to monitor the impact on children and young people's mental health and our partnership approach to dealing with that. I know we said we'd bring back the Future in Mind strategy, but that felt like an omission, that there's not a recommendation around mental health. And similarly, there's not, I thought the report was a bit light on poverty and the impact of the expected increase in child poverty as a result of the pandemic. We've got in the autumn like a correlation of not the right word, like a constellation, I think that's a better word, of like furlough ending, the £20 uplift on universal credit ending, and what started to be called the winter support grant ending all at the same time. And the Child Poverty Impact Board will obviously keep working on that, but it feels like that there also should be some recommendation around child poverty and how this board monitors our work on that. So those would be my two suggestions. I think the mental health fallout and the economic impact of the pandemic are as significant as the educational impact, and the report feels very weighted towards education, particularly in the recommendations. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Venner. Just by way of reminder, we're due to track this again in November, and I think the view of the board is that this was a starting point of a piece of work to identify the areas that we need to look at in more detail. And I think we did discuss it at the pre-meeting, and the view of the board collectively, I think, is really it's too soon to say what the long-term impacts are. And so we'd be looking for this to be tabled again in September. We are due to track all of the things that you mentioned around mental health, around poverty in November. So it's certainly, this is more the starting point rather than an end point. And I'm certain there'll be more recommendations and more work for us to do on those issues. So Councillor Gruen next, and then Councillor Renshaw, please.
Yeah, just on that point, I had agreed in the pre-meeting that having another discussion in September would be a good idea, and I still feel that's the case. But actually, I think we have no way of knowing what as you've just said, the long-term impact is. And I wondered if a way of dealing with that might be to identify a cohort of children and young people who've experienced the full pandemic and track them, because I think the recovery will take years, actually. And it will be interesting to know what the long-term impact might be, either on their learning or mental health, or in any other way. I think it could be 2 to 3 to 4 years before we've got an idea whether COVID has actually had a permanent impact on those young people as they're growing up. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, you're just on mute there.
Sorry, poor form from me. So thank you, Councillor Gruen, and Councillor Renshaw is next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just think child poverty would be a really important one and a crucial one. As parents are coming off furlough, I think there's going to be an impact on families and young people. So I think that would be an important one to have, probably September, October time.
Okay. Councillor Marshall-Catung, please.
Thank you, Chair. What I'd also like to see is actually also the impact on students, and specifically for class of 2020 and 2021, those that were in year 11 going into sixth form, and those who were in year 13 going into university, how it has affected them. Obviously, they are going to be the only two sets so far who have had to go through the sad experience of not writing exams, or have written exams with only being in school for 2 or 3 months, in the whole time. So it will be very, very important to see the impact, and in terms of going forward, what schools have actually done to give some room to those students, knowing they haven't had the full learning that other kids in full-term years have been able to gain compared to them.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Marshall-Catung. Okay, is there any other comments on the work schedule or on the draft report? So Angela, it might just be helpful if you could just clarify what the plan of attack is with this, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to reiterate again, so the draft report is being shared today, obviously, for initial view, so thank you for those. It will need to come back in September, or the next formal public meeting of this board for formal ratification. So it's in the work schedule at the moment for September in that respect. And Chair, as you mentioned earlier, the narrative of the report, I mean, it does acknowledge that this board has already identified, I know, and it's already in the work schedule about actively tracking the implementation of the refreshed Future in Mind strategy, which is scheduled for November, and also the Leeds Child Poverty Strategy, which is already on the schedule for September. And picking up other key issues that will probably come out from its ongoing inquiry around exclusions, elective home education, and the recommendations themselves is just picking up on other key areas that perhaps we hadn't already identified in our work schedule. So I know about the early help and prevention work, review work that's happening, likewise with the work that's ongoing at the moment around early years. So the recommendations really is about ensuring that Scrutiny is engaged in those pieces of work as well. So as I said, thank you very much for your feedback, and it will be coming back in September for formal approval.
Okay, thank you for that, Angela. Okay, so that brings all of our business to a close for this morning. So thank you very much to everybody who's participated and contributed. As ever, we've covered a lot of ground today, and there's a lot of work for us to crack on with through the year. The date and time of the next board meeting is scheduled for the 15th of September at 10 a.m. I very much hope we'll be able to do that in person, in which case I will make sure there are excellent biscuits provided for said meeting. But obviously that will all be under review depending on what's going on at the time. And I think if we know anything now, the new normal is uncertainty. So we'll see where we are. But one way or another, we will see each other at 10 a.m. on the 15th of September. So thank you all very much indeed, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye for now. Bye.